My childhood photos weren't just missing. Someone had torn them apart. The box wasn't meant for me. It was sitting under the table at my parents' anniversary dinner, half hidden, like someone forgot it was there. I only opened it because I recognized the corner of a photo. But when I pulled it out, it wasn't just old memories. It was my childhood, ripped into pieces, every photo of me, torn apart, not damaged, not faded, destroyed, and underneath them was something I hadn't seen in years. A stack of my grandfather's cassette tapes. He passed away before he could ever tell me much about our family, but that night, I realized he might have left something behind. Something they never wanted me to hear, because whatever was on those tapes was buried for a reason.
My name is Mia. I'm 29 years old. And the moment I saw those photos, I knew something had shifted in my family that could never shift back. But to understand what happened that night, you have to understand what came before it. I grew up as the quiet one. Not shy, quiet. There's a difference. Shy people are afraid to speak. I simply learned early that speaking didn't change much in our house. My older brother Daniel was the one who filled rooms. Loud laugh, big personality, the kind of son parents point to at family gatherings and say that one's going places. My younger sister Lily was the baby, which in our family meant permanently protected, permanently excused. And then there was me, somewhere in the middle. Not the first, not the last. Not the loudest, not the most fragile. I was the one who stayed up helping with dishes without being asked. The one who remembered birthdays, planned surprises, printed and framed photos for every anniversary and holiday. I was also, I would later understand, the one they had quietly decided didn't need much. My father worked in property management his whole career. My mother taught part-time and spent the rest of her time maintaining what she called the family image. That phrase came up more than any other in our house. Not are you happy? Not how are you doing? But what does this look like? And what will people think? Appearances weren't just important. They were the architecture of everything. When I got a scholarship for sound engineering at a competitive program, my father said, "Is that the kind of thing that looks impressive at dinner parties?" When I graduated with honors, my mother took one photo and then spent the rest of the evening talking to relatives about Daniel's promotion. When I landed my first full-time job restoring audio archives for a regional media company, nobody in my family knew what that meant, and they didn't ask. I told myself it didn't matter. I had work I loved. I had an apartment I was proud of. I had built something real and quiet and mine. But every holiday I still drove back. Every birthday I still showed up. Because I genuinely believed, that love could exist even without being witnessed. The visit that broke everything started as a regular one. My parents were celebrating their anniversary. Small gathering. Just family. I drove 3 hours to be there because that's what I did. I brought a framed photo I'd spent 2 weeks restoring. An old, water-damaged picture of my parents on their first vacation together. I had cleaned the grain, corrected the color, reprinted it on archival paper. My mother looked at it, said, "Oh, that's nice," and set it face down on the counter. I told myself she was distracted. Dinner was loud in the way our family dinners always were. Daniel holding court. Lily laughing too hard at his jokes. My father nodding like an audience member at a show he'd seen 100 times. I ate quietly, answered questions when asked my own and got half answers. After dinner, I wandered into the hallway looking for the bathroom, and that's when I saw it. A wall that used to hold 6 framed photos. 4 of them were mine. Or rather, they used to be. Now there were gaps. Pale rectangles on the paint where frames had hung for years. I went back to the kitchen and saw the box. Mom. She turned around slowly, like she had been expecting the question. We're updating the hallway. Those were getting old. Those were my photos. My school photos. The one from my graduation. The one you said you'd never take down. She sighed. An actual sigh. Like I had interrupted something important. Mia, don't make this dramatic. It's a wall. Daniel leaned against the door frame behind her. She does this every time. Everything's an event. Lily didn't even look up from her phone. I picked up one of the torn photos from the box. It was my college graduation. Cap and gown. The smile. I'd had to hold for 11 minutes because the photographer kept missing the shot. It was folded in half, right through my face. Why is it torn? I didn't have scissors nearby. She said it like that was a complete answer. Like it was obvious. Like tearing a photograph of your daughter in half with your bare hands was just a practical decision. You make when you're tidying up. I put it back in the box. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I walked to the living room, picked up my bag, and said I had to get back early. My father looked up from the television. "Already?" "Early morning," I said. He nodded and turned back to the screen. Nobody walked me to the door. I drove 40 minutes before I had to pull over. Not because I was crying, because I wasn't, and that scared me more. I sat in a parking lot outside a grocery store and stared at the steering wheel and tried to locate the part of me that was supposed to be surprised. It wasn't there. Because here's the thing about being the invisible one in a family. You spend years interpreting small moments as flukes. They were tired. They were stressed. They didn't mean it like that. You build an entire second language around making excuses for people who never asked for them. But there are moments when the pattern becomes impossible to translate anymore. A torn photograph is not a fluke. A torn photograph is a declaration. I went home and did what I always do when I need to think clearly. I worked. I had 3 audio restoration projects sitting on my desk. An old interview, tape from a regional archive, a damaged recording from a private estate collection, and a personal project I'd been putting off for months. The personal project was a box of mini cassette tapes my grandfather had left me when he passed 2 years earlier. He was my mother's father, the only person in my family who had ever sat across from me and asked, without any agenda, "What do you want your life to look like?" He used to record everything. Notes to himself, observations, conversations. He was meticulous and warm and the kind of person who believed that sound was a form of honoring what actually happened. I had been too emotional to listen to the tapes when he first left them to me. That night, I finally did. The first 3 tapes were what I expected. Personal journals, grocery reminders, a recorded phone call with an old friend. The 4th tape stopped me completely. It was a conversation. My grandfather's voice and someone else's. The other voice was familiar, but I couldn't immediately place it until my grandfather said a name. He said my name. "Mia has always been the one who holds things together," he said. "I want to make sure she's protected after I'm gone." The other voice said something I couldn't fully make out. Lots of static. I slowed the playback and cleaned the frequency. And then I heard it clearly. "Don't worry about Mia. She'll land on her feet. She always does. And honestly, Dad, she doesn't expect much. That's always been her thing." It was my mother's voice. "She doesn't expect much. That's always been her thing." I played it again. Twice. 3 times. Not because I wasn't sure what I'd heard. Because I needed to understand how long that had been true. I didn't sleep that night. By morning, I had listened to every tape. Most were unremarkable. But there were 3 conversations that changed everything. I thought I understood about my family. The first was my grandfather, 2 months before he passed, telling my mother that he wanted a specific amount left in a joint account he'd set up, designated. He said clearly, for me, for stability. Because he had watched for years as I invested. In the family without the family, investing back. The second was my mother telling my aunt that the account would be more reabsorbed into general family expenses because, and I'm quoting here, "Mia doesn't know it exists, so it's not like she'll miss it." The third was a more recent recording. The recorder must have been left running by accident, in which I heard my father, my mother, and Daniel discussing the family property. Apparently, there had been financial difficulties I'd never been told about. And apparently the plan, the actual stated plan, was to get me to co-sign a document that would put my name on the liability without giving me any actual ownership. "She'll do it if Mom asks her the right way," Daniel said. "She always does." I sat at my desk as the sun came up, and I looked at my hands. I had been, for my entire adult life, a resource. Not a daughter. Not a sister. A resource. Quiet, reliable, available, and, most importantly, not expecting much. And I had let them believe that was who I was. For 3 weeks, I said nothing. I went to work. I ate dinner alone. I restored old tapes and archived sound files and sat with the strange, hollow feeling of knowing something nobody else knew you knew. I didn't tell anyone. Not my friends, not my colleagues. I watched the family group chat fill up with casual messages. Daniel posting about a new purchase. Lily asking for advice about something minor. My mother sending photos of the newly decorated hallway. Fresh paint. New frames, different art. No photos of me anywhere. The wall had been completely redone. And in the center, where my graduation photo used to hang, there was now a large framed print of abstract shapes in muted colors. I stared at it for a long time. Then I started making calls. The first call was to an estate attorney, just a consultation, nothing formal. I explained the situation with the account my grandfather had set up. I explained what I'd heard on the tape. The attorney was measured and careful, but confirmed that if the account had been designated by name, redirecting it without consent was not simply a family matter. The second call was to my grandfather's longtime friend, a man named Mr. Calloway, who had been present at many of my grandfather's personal arrangements and who, it turned out, had witnessed the original account setup. He remembered it clearly. He remembered me clearly. "Your grandfather talked about you more than you probably know," he said. "He used to say you were the one in the family who understood that quiet doesn't mean invisible." I thanked him and sat for a long time after hanging up. Then I opened my laptop and began documenting everything. I want to be clear about something. I did not want to destroy my family. I did not wake up every morning planning some elaborate justice. What I wanted was simple and enormous at the same time. I wanted to stop being the one who absorbed everything and received nothing and was expected to find that arrangement acceptable. That's all. But simple wants, when they've been ignored for decades, have a way of becoming something else when the evidence finally lines up. Over the following days, I built a clean, careful file. Payment records I could corroborate, tape transcriptions, the attorney's preliminary notes, a timeline. I wasn't angry when I did it. I was focused, precise. I had spent years restoring other people's histories, cleaning up damage, making audible what had been buried. Now I was doing it for myself. 3 weeks after I found the box of torn photos, my mother called. She didn't mention the photos. She talked about a family dinner she was planning. She wanted everyone together. "It's been too long," she said. "We miss you." I agreed to come. I booked my train ticket and sat with the knowledge of what I was carrying and said nothing. 2 days before the dinner, Daniel called. This was unusual. Daniel called me approximately 3 times a year. Birthday, a major holiday, and whenever he needed something. "Hey, so, Mom mentioned you're coming down this weekend." "That's right." "Good. There's actually something we wanted to talk to you about." "A document. Just a formality, really. Won't take long." My stomach didn't drop. I had been waiting for this. "What kind of document?" "Just property-related. Dad will explain it better. It's all very straightforward." "Okay," I said. "I'll be there." I hung up and added the call to my file. The dinner was warm in the surface, way my family had always been warm at the surface. Good food, comfortable chairs. My mother moving between kitchen and table with the practiced ease of someone who had hosted gatherings her whole life. She hugged me at the door. Properly. Both arms. She smelled like the same perfume she'd worn my entire childhood. For 1 second, just one, I felt 9 years old again. Then she pulled back and said, "You look tired. Are you sleeping?" And I was 29 again. Dinner passed without incident. I was pleasant. I asked questions. I listened more than I spoke, which everyone in my family interpreted as contentment. After dessert, my father brought out a folder. "This is just a co-signature situation," he said, setting it in front of me. "A liability buffer for the property. It protects all of us. Completely routine." I looked at the document without touching it. "What property?" "The family property. You know, we've had some financial restructuring. This is part of stabilizing things. And my name goes on the liability. As a co-signer. For protection." "Whose protection?" My father smiled the way he smiled when he thought charm was working. "Everyone's, Mia, that's the point." I looked around the table. Daniel was looking at his phone. Lily was looking at her hands. My mother was looking at me with an expression I recognized. That careful, practiced look that said, "Please just go along with this." I closed the folder and pushed it back gently. "I'm not signing this." The temperature in the room changed. "Mia," my mother started. "I'm not signing it," I said again. "And I think we should talk about why you thought I would." What followed was 20 minutes. I will never fully describe because some silences and some sentences don't translate into language. There was anger. There was the particular cruelty that families deploy when they feel exposed. "You've always been so sensitive. And this is exactly why we don't include you in things. And after everything we've done for you." I didn't raise my voice. I let every sentence land and I said, quietly and clearly, "I know about Grandpa's account." The room went completely still. "I know about the designation. I know about what happened to the money. I know about the conversation you had with Aunt Ruth. And I know about the property plan because I heard it." My mother's face did something I had never seen it do before. It lost its arrangement. Not tears, not anger, just absence. Like a version of her that had existed as performance. For a very long time had just stepped off stage. "How?" she said. Not a question. More like the beginning of a sentence she couldn't finish. "Grandpa left me his tapes," I said. I restored them. That's what I do. I left shortly after that. Not dramatically. I helped clear the dishes. I put on my coat. I said goodbye. Daniel didn't look at me. Lily stared at me like she was seeing me for the first time. My father sat at the table with his hands flat on the wood, looking at the folder I hadn't signed. I walked to my car and drove back to my apartment and sat in the quiet of the place I had built for myself and thought, okay, now it begins. I didn't know yet exactly what was coming. I didn't know that in 3 weeks. My father's financial situation would become more critical than any of them had let on. I didn't know that the document I hadn't signed would matter more than I realized. I didn't know that my silence, for once, would be the thing that terrified them most. And I didn't know that 23 days later, at 2 a.m, I would be standing on the other side of my own front door, listening to my entire family pound against it in the dark. My mother crying. My father's voice stripped of every authority he had ever used against me. My sister saying, "Please just let us in." I didn't know any of that yet, but the box of torn photos was still sitting on my counter. I'd brought it home without thinking about it. And that night, looking at it, I understood something my grandfather had said on one of those tapes. Something I hadn't fully absorbed until that moment. The ones who stay quiet the longest, he'd said, are usually the ones who've been listening the most carefully. I had been listening my whole life, and I was just about to start speaking. Part 2. The first week after that dinner, nothing happened. No calls, no texts, not even a message in the family group chat. That silence was new. My family had always used noise as control, filling, space with enough chatter and normalcy that any serious conversation felt like an overreaction. Silence meant they were regrouping, deciding on a strategy. I had expected that. What I hadn't expected was how peaceful my apartment felt during those 7 days. I slept well. I cooked actual meals. I went to work and sat in my quiet booth with my headphones on and restored a 1970s radio broadcast for a regional archive project and felt, for the first time in years, completely present in my own life. My colleague Dara noticed on Wednesday. "You seem different," she said, handing me a coffee. "Different how?" She thought about it. "Like you put something down." I looked at her for a second. "Yeah," I said. "I think I did." On day 9, Daniel called. I let it ring twice. Then I answered. His voice was different from the last time. The easy confidence he carried everywhere, that default setting of someone who had never been told no by the people, who were supposed to love him unconditionally, was still there. But underneath it, something was unsteady. "We need to talk about what happened at dinner." "Okay," I said. "You caught everyone off guard. The document, Dad just needed a signature. It wasn't what you made it sound like." "I didn't make it sound like anything," I said. "I asked questions and then declined. You brought up Grandpa's account in front of everyone. I mentioned that I knew about it." "That's true." A pause. "How much do you actually know?" And there it was. Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "Can we fix this?" Just, "How much do you know?" The question of someone calculating exposure, not someone genuinely trying to reach you. "Enough," I said. He hung up 40 seconds later. I added the call to my file. 3 days after that, my mother texted. It was a long message, the kind that starts with "I've been doing a lot of thinking," and then slowly, carefully constructs a version of events where everyone was trying their best and things just got misunderstood. She said she was sorry I felt hurt. She did not say she was sorry for tearing the photos. She did not mention the account. She said she hoped we could move past this as a family, and that she missed me, and that sometimes families go through rough patches and what matters is coming back, together stronger. I read it 3 times. Then I set my phone face down on the table and went back to work. I want to tell you something about that period, those quiet weeks between the dinner and what came later, because I think people assume that when you finally see your family clearly, when the pattern becomes undeniable, you feel powerful, liberated, like a door swinging open into light. Sometimes it feels like that, but sometimes it just feels like standing in a room you've lived in your whole life and suddenly noticing that none of the furniture was ever yours, that the pictures on the wall were always of someone else's life, that the warmth you remembered was real, but it was also conditional, in ways you'd been too young or too willing to understand. I wasn't angry during those weeks. I was something quieter and harder to name, something like grief with its coat still on. Not ready to stay, not ready to leave. My grandfather had seen me, fully, clearly, without agenda, and he had tried, in his methodical, careful way, to leave me something that acknowledged that, and they had taken it. Not out of cruelty exactly, out of the same casual assumption that had run through my entire childhood. Mia doesn't expect much. Mia will be fine. Mia doesn't need to know. That was what I was grieving. Not the money. Not even the photos. The assumption. On a Tuesday evening, 23 days after the dinner, my phone lit up with a name I hadn't seen in years. My Aunt Ruth, my mother's older sister. The family historian, the one who remembered every birthday, every grudge, every version of every story. She and my mother were close in the way that two people are close when they've known each other's secrets long enough that closeness becomes necessity. She had been on that tape. The one where my mother told her about the account. "Mia," she said when I answered. Her voice was careful. "I think we need to talk. Not as family, just as two people who both loved your grandfather." I said nothing. "I know what was on those tapes," she said. "Or I can guess. And I want you to know, I told your mother it was wrong. When it happened, I told her. But you didn't tell me." Silence. "No," she said. "I didn't tell you." I appreciated that she didn't try to dress that up. "Why are you calling now?" I asked. A long pause. "Because things are worse than you know, and I think someone should be honest with you before it arrives at your door." She told me carefully, in the measured way of someone who had rehearsed this conversation several times. My father's financial situation had deteriorated faster than the family dinner had suggested. The property restructuring wasn't a buffer against future risk. It was a response to a current crisis. There were overdue obligations, a refinancing that hadn't gone through, a payment schedule that had quietly collapsed. The document they'd wanted me to sign wouldn't have protected me. It would have transferred significant liability onto my name, while keeping ownership and decision-making firmly with my father. "They thought you'd sign it because you always have," Ruth said quietly. "Not those exact documents, but versions of it. Your time, your support, your silence." "I know," I said. "Your grandfather knew too. That's why he set up the account the way he did. He wanted you to have something that was just yours, something they couldn't fold into the general story." I sat very still. "The account," I said. "Is any of it left?" Another pause. "Longer this time. I don't know exactly, but I know your father made withdrawals. He called them temporary. They weren't." I closed my eyes. "Ruth," I said, "why are you telling me this tonight specifically?" She exhaled slowly. "Because your mother called me an hour ago. They're coming to your apartment. All of them, tonight. I had 40 minutes. I used them well. I called Mr. Calloway, my grandfather's witness, and told him I might need a formal statement in the coming days. He said he'd been expecting my call, and yes, absolutely, whatever I needed. I organized my file and sent a copy to a secure external account. Clean, time-stamped, complete. I made a cup of tea and sat at my kitchen table and looked at the box of torn photos still, sitting on the counter. I had not put them away. I hadn't been able to decide what to do with them. Some were too damaged to restore. A few were only torn at the edges, the image still mostly intact. I took one out, my first day of secondary school. I was 12 years old and wearing a backpack that was too big for me and squinting into the sun. My grandfather had taken that photo. I remembered because he'd made me laugh right before the shutter clicked and then said, "That's the one. That's the real one." I set it on the table in front of me and waited. They arrived at 1:47 in the morning. The knocking started quietly, which surprised me. I'd expected the approach my father usually used. Authority as first language. Loud. Declarative. Instead, it was my mother's knuckles. A small, tentative sound. 3 soft knocks. Then my father's voice. Low and taut. "Mia, we know you're awake. Please open the door." I walked to the door and looked through the peephole. All 4 of them. My mother in a coat she'd grabbed too quickly. It was inside out at the collar. My father, jaw set. Eyes somewhere between fury and something I had never seen on him before. Daniel behind them looking at his shoes. And Lily. My little sister Lily, with her arms crossed over her chest, Not in defiance, but in the way people hold themselves when they're cold and scared. I kept the chain on and opened the door 2 inches. "It's 2 a.m, I said. "We need to talk," my father said. "We're past the talking stages," I said. "You had years of talking available to you. You used them differently." My mother pressed closer to the gap. "Mia, please. Please just let us in. Tell me why you're here first." A pause. My father's instinct was clearly to push through it with authority. I could see him organizing that response. And then, for the first time in my memory, he seemed to think better of it. "The refinancing fell through," he said. "Completely. The bank wants full documentation by Friday. If we can't provide it," he stopped. "What happens if you can't provide it?" "We lose the property." I let that sit in the hallway between us. "And you came here," I said slowly, "because you think I can stop that?" "Because you're our daughter," my mother said, and her voice broke on the last word in a way I hadn't heard before. Not performed, actually broken. "I've been your daughter my whole life," I said. That didn't seem to carry much weight until tonight. Daniel spoke then. He stepped forward, and for a moment, I thought he was going to say something dismissive, something that would snap the situation back into the familiar shape we'd always inhabited. Instead, he said very quietly, "I knew about the account. I knew when it happened." The hallway went absolutely still. "I didn't say anything," he continued, "because it didn't affect me directly. And because that's what I always did. Whatever kept things easy, whatever kept me on the right side of it." He looked up and met my eyes through the 2-inch gap. "That was wrong," he said. "I'm saying it now because it's true, not because of the property. It was wrong, and I knew it then." I studied my brother's face for a long moment. He was 34 years old. He looked right then about 19, like someone who has been carrying something they thought was normal weight, until the moment they set it down and realized how heavy it actually was. I didn't forgive him in that moment. Forgiveness isn't a moment. It's a long and private process that other people don't get to witness or schedule. But I heard him. "Here is what I need," I said. "From all of you, before anything else." Nobody moved. "I need you to say out loud right now what happened with Grandpa's account. Not a version of it. The actual thing." My mother made a small sound. "Evelyn," my father said. He almost never used her name like that. "He's right," she said. Then to me, "We redirected the account. After he passed. Your father said it was necessary, and I told myself you'd be fine. That you always land on your feet. That I don't expect much," I said. She flinched. "Yes." "Say the rest," I said. A long pause. "We were going to use your co-signature to offset the liability without telling you what you were actually signing. We thought, your father thought, that by the time you understood the full picture, the refinancing would be complete, and it wouldn't matter." "It would have mattered," I said. "It would have been my name on it." "I know," she whispered. "Do you?" "Because from inside this family, the working assumption has always been that my name doesn't carry the same weight as everyone else's. My name on a photo wall wasn't worth keeping. My name on a liability document was worth forging a signature for. That's not a rough patch. That's a system." Nobody answered that, because there was no answer for it. I want to tell you what I did not do in that moment. I did not open the door wide and let them in, and cry and hold each other and let the warmth of family override the weight of the evidence. I've seen that version of the story. I've lived adjacent to it my whole life. The version where you absorb the hurt and fold it away and return to the table and call that love. I understand why people choose it, I do. But I had spent 29 years choosing it. And I had the torn photos and the tape recordings, and the signed document and the redirected account to show what that choice had built. So instead I said this: "I'm not signing anything. Not tonight, not this week. You will not contact my employer or anyone in my professional life about any of this. If you need a formal accounting of what happened with Grandpa's estate, Mr. Calloway has agreed to provide a statement." My father's head came up sharply. "You called Calloway?" He was Grandpa's witness. He remembers everything clearly. The silence that followed had a different quality. The kind that comes when people realize the walls they thought were paper are actually stone. "What do you want us to do?" my mother asked. "Tonight, go home. Get some sleep. In the morning, call your bank and your attorney and handle your situation honestly, with documentation that's actually yours. And the property? That's not my problem to solve," I said. "It never should have been." Lily spoke for the first time. She was 24 years old, and she had always been the protected one. The baby. The one the family scaffolded without question. She said, "I didn't know all of it. I want you to know that. I knew things were hard, and I knew they wanted your help. But I didn't know. I didn't know about Grandpa's money." I looked at her. "I believe you." "I'm sorry," she said. "For the photos, too. I watched Mom tear them and I didn't say anything. That landed differently than everything else. Because Lily was the one I'd protected. In my own way, included, remembered, shown up for. Quietly, in the way I showed up for everyone. "Thank you for saying that," I told her. And I meant it. They left at 2:24 in the morning. My mother paused at the elevator and turned back once. She looked like she wanted to say something that hadn't been invented yet. Something that could reach across 29 years and account for all of it in a single sentence. There is no such sentence. She turned back around and stepped into the elevator. I closed my door and stood in my hallway for a long moment. Then I went to my kitchen table and sat down and looked at the photo of my 12-year-old self squinting into the sun with the too big backpack. I thought about my grandfather saying that's the real one. I thought about all the versions of me that had existed in that family. The useful one. The quiet one. The one who doesn't expect much. And how none of them had ever been the real one. And I thought about who I was now in this apartment, in this life I had built from the outside in. In the weeks that followed, things resolved the way true things resolve. Not cleanly, not completely, but honestly. My father's financial situation required him to negotiate directly with the bank. It was difficult and humbling and entirely his to handle. The property was eventually restructured on terms that required real documentation and real accountability. Not my name, his. My mother sent a letter, actual paper, handwritten. That was 4 pages long and did not contain the phrase, "I'm sorry you felt." It contained the phrase, "I'm sorry I did." That's a different sentence. It matters. I read it twice and put it in a drawer. Daniel called once more about a month later. We talked for 40 minutes about things that had nothing to do with the property or the account or the document. Just life. His mine. The first real conversation we had ever had as adults. At the end, he said, "I'm glad you didn't sign it." "Me too," I said. Lily texted periodically. Small Things, a song she thought I'd like. A photo of a sunset, the beginning of something that might, over a long time and with care, become an actual relationship between two actual people. I did not rush any of it. I restored the torn photos. Not all of them. Some were too damaged, the paper too compromised. But several were salvageable. I took them to my studio and treated them the way I'd treat any damaged archive, with patience, with precision, with respect for what had existed before someone decided it wasn't worth keeping. The kindergarten photo. The secondary school one my grandfather had taken. A birthday photo from when I was 7, holding a cake with both hands, laughing at something off-frame. I had them reprinted on archival paper and framed them myself. They're on my wall now. My wall, my apartment, my choice of what goes on it. People ask me sometimes, and I've thought about it carefully, whether I regret how it unfolded, whether I wish I had handled it differently, been softer, given them more chances. And here is my honest answer. I gave them 29 years of chances. The shape of those chances just looked like silence, and availability, and absorbing things without naming them, and showing up even when showing up cost me more than anyone knew. What changed wasn't my willingness to give. What changed was my understanding of what I deserved to receive. That's not revenge. That's not cruelty. That's just the moment when you look at the torn-up photo of yourself and realize, I would never do this to someone I loved. So what does it mean that they did it to me? And once you ask that question clearly, you can't unask it. My grandfather used to say that sound is honest in a way that memory isn't. Memory edits, sound records. I have spent my career believing that, working with it every day. But what I learned from those tapes, what I learned from all of it, is that sometimes the most important thing isn't what you record. It's what you finally decide to play out loud. I kept quiet for a long time. Not because I had nothing to say, because I was listening, building the file, waiting for the moment when speaking would mean something. That moment came at 2 a.m, through a 2-inch gap in my door, with my family standing in the hallway, looking for a version of me that would absorb everything one more time. She wasn't there. In her place was someone who had finally, after 29 years, decided that her own story was worth restoring. So I'll ask you what I've been asking myself since that night. When someone in your life has always treated your silence as permission, What does it take for you to finally speak? And when you do speak, who do you become? I know my answer now. I'm still getting used to her, but I think I'm going to like who she is. At a certain point, the story stopped asking for answers. It simply settled into what it had become. The uncertainty that once defined everything no longer felt as heavy. It had been replaced by a quieter kind of understanding. Nothing was perfectly resolved, and it didn't need to be. Because not every story is meant to end with complete clarity. Some are meant to leave space for reflection, to be revisited with a different perspective over time. In the end, what mattered wasn't the outcome itself. It was the awareness gained along the way. Because that awareness doesn't fade. It stays, shaping how everything is seen from that point forward.